Moving on to agenda item number 7, appearing on page 41 of our agenda. It's the draft Manga Totari Reserve Management Plan submission summary item. And we have Anna, and, oh, there you are, and I believe Shelley Monrad from Becca. Welcome. Anna, are you happy just to lead on this matter?
Morena koutou. I'm actually going to hand over to Shelley, who's far more in the depth and the detail about the plan.
Cool. Thanks, Anna. Good morning, everyone. It's certainly nice to be back here in the chamber and see some familiar faces around the table. It's been a while, but yeah, so hello. So as I'm Shelley Monrad from Becca. I've also got Vicky in the back there as well. It's also helped with this review process as well. So basically, I'd like to just recognise through this whole process for the RMP, the partnership that was formed really well with the iwi reference group, and also working with Anna and Sally as well to get to this point too. So yeah, just realize that. So in terms of going through this, so basically I'll try and take the report as read, I think, which would be the easiest way in terms of the summary document, and just do a bit of a quick high level summary. So as you're aware, it came in May to this committee for approval to go out and get to be notified. Submissions opened on the 25th of May and closed at the end of July. There was 21 submissions that were received, and none of those submitters wished to be heard, so we were able to not have a hearing, which was great. There was a total of 134 points that were raised throughout the process. A lot of those were support, oppose or neutral in specific areas of the plan, so that's where the numbers come in. There were 25 comments that were received on the plan, and those are what were summarised in the report at the back, which was sorted by topic. It was basically the chapters. Overall, there was really just a really good support for the plan. I can't really say too much more about that, I don't think. There's a few minor changes and stuff to the plan as well. And yeah, anything else you want to add in terms of summary? Yeah. I think that's pretty much all really, I think, yeah. Questions?
Thank you very much, Shelley. And I just want to draw your attention to a comment made by Ngāti Koreki Kahukura, who were pleased that the review provided an opportunity for a clearer and more forward-thinking reserve management plan that places the manga at the centre, which was one of the key changes. So I think it's a great plan, and that sort of bears out across the board in terms of most of the comments. So do we have any comments or questions from members? Claire?
Thanks, it is a great plan. Yeah, I'm really pleased to see it. I did have a couple of questions, and there were a few minor things that might need to be corrected, but which I can send to you. How long is the plan in force for? Does it have a determined, like is it 10 years or something like that? And the other question I had was, there are comments about the importance of maintaining the fence, that it might need to be replaced in 20 years, and that's a role that council's going to have a key part to play in. But none of the sort of performance or reporting things are to do with finances or to do with cost effectiveness or balancing the outcomes with the inputs and things like that. So just any questions on whether or not those kind of reporting things were considered or not?
Through the chair, happy to answer the question about how long the plan's in force for. So under the Reserves Act, management plans are supposed to be reviewed every 10 years. That's often beyond the resource capabilities of councils, so councils do their best to follow that guidance, but many are in place for a lot longer than that. The monitoring.
Sally, did you want to add something to that?
Morena, and through the chair. So just in response to the question around financials in relation to the management plan. So essentially the management plan is there to look at the outcomes for the reserve and working with our partners to achieve those outcomes. The financial mechanisms are still through our long-term planning or working with our partners around that. So within a management plan context, you wouldn't necessarily see measures from a financial point of view in the management plan. That's more when we bring things to the 10-year plan process to talk through those. So that's just a differentiation, and also around asset management planning as well, which leads through that. So in terms of response to your questions is you wouldn't see that within this plan, but we would bring it through other council mechanisms to the table to be discussed.
Happy with that, Claire?
And are you happy for me to send you my annotations, which pick up, you know, just yeah, just some, like one of them was that it talks about the southern enclosure has access, direct access that Waipara District Council has, I suppose, provided. But in fact, I'm aware that it's not direct access. I mean, that has to go through some other land or something. There's a bit, so yeah, yeah.
Through the chair and changing microphones here. So just in terms of the access that is through to the southern enclosure is actually Waipara District Council land. So that was an acquisition. So that is correct within the plan that it is through our land.
Oh, well, it just says on page 11 to formalisation of access into the southern enclosure with the goodwill of landowners. On page 11 on in the second column at the top. Yeah, so yeah.
So yeah, appreciate if you have any other annotations there as well.
Yeah, Sally, can I send them to you? Because I'm sorry, Anna, you're not in my system. And then yeah, cool.
Thank you, Claire. Any other questions? Alwyn, you happy to, is there, before we move and put the recommendation, any other discussion to be had?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I was particularly pleased with the comments that we did get back, and also more pleased that we didn't have a stream of people coming here bitching and moaning about what might or might not have happened. But from my point of view, it was meaning that what we were doing was on track and everybody was pretty damn pleased with what we were doing and just fine-tuning a few things, and I think that bodes well for the mana itself. It's good. Thank you.
Thanks, granted. Claire, sorry, Liz, did you have something to say?
Yeah, thank you. Hey, look, I guess I'm just really, really pleased that this process is coming, to an end. I'm really rapt that this reserve management plan has been prioritised. I understand limitations, but this is a really important, manga for us. And when you look at the partners and look at what we've achieved over, many, many years, this is a particularly special place for a lot of people in New Zealand, actually. So the feedback, I'm really impressed actually, the engagement that I've seen from neighbours, from local iwi, from other groups, that have had an association. So just absolutely rapt that we've got this over the line, that everyone is happy with the direction we're taking in, and to sort of vocalise Councillor Webber's comments as well, that it feels like we're really on track and this has a bright, bright future.
Thank you, Liz. Bruce, did you want to add some comments?
Yes, please. Thank you. There were two submissions. One was Jane McHale point, and I can't see the other one at the moment. The northern enclosure through realignment of that, and it has to go through the Maori Land Court. Have you got any idea how long that takes?
If I can, through the chair, I understand we are at a point at the moment where it is easement documents are being signed or need to be signed to then be processed through the Māori Land Court. In terms of their work program and the time frame, we are unsure of how quickly they can be processed. But obviously the key thing that's on everybody's mind is around Christmas is coming. Sorry, unfortunately it's coming quickly, and therefore we would like to have that open. So we're in conversations around trying to negotiate that opening, but we don't have any actual firm timeframes of how long that could take through the Māori Land Court.
Does that inhibit us doing anything? We can't start before we get that?
So all of the works have been done to enable access to commence as soon as the road order have been removed and reinstated. So essentially it will be the legal process we're waiting on. It's whether or not we can negotiate that public access before the Māori Land Court is completed. So that's what we are trying to work on.
Mike.
Yeah, through the chair, as a clarification, cultural harvest and just what that refers to. If I look down the submission there, it's sort of it mentions species, but it mentions for weavers and for carvers, etc., etc. So is that forest and fauna? Is that forest, fauna, bird life? Just wanted to get an understanding around what that actually means in terms of, rather than just speech marks.
Through the chair. So the policy is set up to cover flora and fauna, and the recommended amendment is to reference the Reserves Act and the Wildlife Act, which is where you get the specific clauses about, for example, birds, which birds could actually be harvested and the process for that. And there's very few on the mainland that are able to be harvested. So I think predominantly it's going to be about the trees and the fauna and using it for rongoa and weaving and other sort of cultural practices.
Yata.
Tēnā tātou. Just a question for clarification, really. So with the recommendations within the report, these are being accepted, is that correct? So they will be stated in this plan for the next however long, 10 years? Yeah.
Through the chair, kia ora. Yes, so that's right. We're seeking that the adoption of those recommended changes today. And I just note that we have worked closely with the reference group, assessing the feedback and just clarifying the wording of those recommended changes.
Sorry, I'll just add to that as well. So the document that was also attached to the report has also got the changes recommended made in there, and they're just highlighted in yellow as well, so you can see those. Any further discussion or questions? No? Well, I already have Elwyn who moved. Who will have a seconder? Philip is happy to second. All those in favour in terms of that recommendation say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Shelley, Anna and Sally. So this takes us to our next agenda item. So we're on page 102 of our agenda, and this is a report being produced by Carl Tutty. Subject is the dog controls on Mount Kakepuku. Welcome, Carl.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. So yep, 101 of your agenda. So the bulk of this report is a repeat of background information that you've already seen, outlining the issue in respect to dogs being allowed on Kakapuka Manga, and the concerns raised by the iwi group who would prefer that area be prohibited to dogs. So I don't propose to cover the full report because you've seen most of it. The purpose of today is to update you on the feedback from the iwi Consultative Committee. You'll recall when this matter was before you last, you resolved to pass it to that committee for feedback, specifically in terms of whether the committee agreed that controls should be re-examined in terms of Kakapuku, whether there were other areas of concern that should be investigated, and what their view was in terms of the review of the dog control policy itself. So some of you were present at that meeting, and you'll be aware that essentially there was very strong support from the committee for re-examining the controls as they are applied to Kakapuku, with a view to making council's portion of that reserve dog prohibited in line with the adjoining Department of Conservation portion. No other areas of concern were raised at the meeting, and ultimately that led to two resolutions from the committee, which you have at the top of page 101. Firstly, a recommendation that the dog control policy review be brought forward as soon as possible, i.e. prior to its 2025 scheduled date, which I'll come back to in a second. And secondly, that council look at options around whether the classification or management of that piece of reserve could be changed. So as I've outlined, one of the issues is that arises from the Department of Conservation Land automatically receiving dog prohibition status, our part of the reserve automatically receiving dog permitted. So that's where part of the conflict is. And I hadn't looked at the possibilities of a change in that level in terms of the management of and classification of the reserve itself. So that was quite a useful discussion. So the staff view at this stage is to effectively reverse the order of those two recommendations solely from a practicality point of view. If it's possible to change the classification or management of the reserve, therefore applying the dog prohibition status that's afforded to the dockland, that could potentially be done in isolation to this piece of reserve, addresses the issue of concern that's been raised, and could leave the dog control policy review to run its normal course. Therefore, it would be the staff view that this process be undertaken first to assess whether that's feasible, and then it can be pursued and leave the policy till later. The concerns for starting the policy first are firstly the amount of work that's going to be required in a very short period of time for that to happen, and some of those issues are summarised on page 105 of your agenda, and we're really not in that position yet because obviously we weren't expecting to do it until close to the 2025. But there's also no guarantee through that process that that change would happen. So if we're able to pursue the change and management or classification, then that may provide more certainty to all parties going forward. And in the meantime, obviously, there's nothing to stop us progressing the work that's needed leading up to a review, which may very well still be earlier than the scheduled date. So this leads to the two resolutions in the report that are in front of you today, effectively asking you to endorse staff entering a discussion with the Department of Conservation around the management and classification of the reserve, and depending on the decision from that conversation, then come back to look at formalising a date for the review of the policy and its associated bylaw. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Oh, excuse me. Thank you, Carly. Have we got any questions or comments for Mike? You look like you.
Well, just a comment, Carl. Just reading through that, I just think what you've come up with makes really good sense. Just to sort of hasten slowly, try and deal with the immediate, but not try and rush this and get it wrong, because there's so many dog owners in this district that will be affected by this review. So yeah, I think you've got it the right way around, and when the time comes, happy to move that.
Mariata?
Just here, Patai. Kia ora, thank you for that. With your recommendations here, have you worked with Te Kupu and Marae to discuss these as an option?
That's where the original request for the changes in the prohibition have come from, and that's been our undertaking that we will work through this process with that goal in mind. So whichever is the most efficient way of doing that and addressing those concerns is where we'll go.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Liz?
Yeah, I'm happy to move the recommendation. Carl, this is not going to be an easy one. I think you know that. There are a number of opinions on this matter, but we need to work through this and make sure that we get an outcome that hopefully will suit everybody, not necessarily please everybody. So happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Liz. Lou, are you happy to second?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll second that motion on the grounds that I do think that we need to go through the due process. I do agree with Carl that bringing the whole dog plan forward from 25 is probably a little bit difficult, and I can see that your agenda that you wrote out here is quite considerable other things to consider. The interesting thing was, of course, that this was originally farmland. So that is why this has gone through this process, that we've only purchased this recently to create access to the mountain. So it's made it very difficult. And I mean, I know a number of people that live around that mountain that have dogs anyway. So yeah, it's going to be a difficult one to actually enforce totally, especially with farm dogs. But I do second the motion. I think that's a good process, Carl. Well done.
Thank you, Lou. So Liz moved it, Lou has seconded it. There being no further, Andrew looks like he's got a finger. Discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I I'm guessing changing the classification will have ramifications, possibly advantages, possibly disadvantage for us, and that will be part of what you'll come back to us with.
Through the chair, correct, and there's potential influences on other reserve land and how it's managed as well that all need to be considered, whether there's an exchange of roles or other sort of mechanisms to make it happen.
Lou, did you have another comment?
Just a question, as I understood it through you, Madam Chair, that the original intent was to have discussion with the Department of Conservation. Is that correct? And change the status of the land, well, have an agreement with the Department of Conservation. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, if they're not open to this path, then that's our answer.
Yeah. Right, that being the case, I think we've exhausted all discussion on that point. We've had the motion put and seconded, sorry. Liz and Lou, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried.
Cool. Thank you all.
Roger, you had your hand up. Were you just acknowledging? Yeah, good. Just checking. I hate to miss you. Right, so now it moves in. We have a resolution there on page 142 to exclude the public. Andrew and seconded Phil. All those in favour say aye.